Multiplying and dividing fractions. Let's talk about the sign of your answer. Our sign rule for multiplying and dividing is you just count the number of negatives. So if it's an odd number of negatives, we're going to get a negative answer. And if it's an even number of negatives, it's going to be a positive answer. So, for example, -5 times -4, that's an even number of negatives. So -5 times -4 would be a positive answer. But if it would have been -5 times +4, it would have been a negative answer, because then we'd have an odd number of negatives. All right, no common denominator is needed for multiplying or dividing fractions. I can't tell you how many times as an educator I see people trying to get a common denominator when they multiply. That's just extra work. You don't need to do that. And if you're like me, all you need is more work to do, right? All right, our multiplying steps. First, we want to convert mixed numbers to improper fractions. So don't get mixed up on that. Next, we want to look for common factors occurring on both, keyword both, the top and the bottom of fractions. Next up, we multiply across. And then finally, we don't want to have our answer as an improper fraction, so we should convert it to a mixed number. So we already have 4 steps there, so remember, you don't want to make that extra step and getting the same denominator. All right, let's try an example problem with a negative. So let's say that we had -7/9 multiplied by 12/13. Remember, parentheses without a symbol there or a sign means that we are multiplying. So I'm going to rewrite this as -7/9 times 12/13. And I'm looking for common factors. The reason I'm already on step 2 is because step 1 doesn't apply. These are both going to be proper fractions. I don't have any mixed numbers here. So I'm on to step 2. And 9 and 12, 9 and 7, 12 and 13, 12 and 9. Do I have any common factors among any of those top and bottom numbers? 9 and 12. So 9 and 12 have a common factor of 3, so we'll go into it 3 times. 3 will go into 12 4 times. And then I can double check. 13's prime though, so it won't go with 4 and 7. And then 3 will not go with 7 or 4. They don't have any common factors. So just multiply across. We're on step 3. And -7 times 4. And really, I just need to think back to my signs. I have an odd number of negatives. I have 1 negative. So I know my answer is going to be negative. So 7 times 4 is 28. And 3 times 13 is 39. And magically, our answer is reduced. Poof! Just like that. It's already reduced. Mathematician has become a mathemagician. All right, I'm getting a little bored with just numbers. Why don't we throw some letters in the mix? Make this a little more challenging for you. Say we had -2 4/5 multiplied by -6x/7. Well, again, if we have parentheses and no other operation, that means multiply. And I'm looking at my first step. It says convert mixed numbers to improper. Whoops, we have a mixed number. So 5 times 2 is 10, plus the 4 is 14, all over 5. And that's a negative number, so it's negative 14 over 5 times negative 6x over 7. All right, now I'm on step 2. I want to look for common factors that are on both the top and the bottom. So, for instance, 5 and 14, nah, they don't have anything in common. 5 and 6, no. 7 and 6, no. And 7 and 14, they do have a common factor. 7 will go into both of those numbers. 7 will go into 14 twice and into 7 once. And I'm going to take a look at my negatives. So I have 1 negative, 2 negatives. That's an even number of negatives. So I know my answer is going to be positive. So multiply across. 2 times 6x is 12x. And 5 times 1 is 5. But I need to make this into a improper fraction. Should be mixed numbers. So 5 will go into 12 2 times, and then that equals 10, so 11, 12, there's 2 left over. So this equals 2, and 2 left over, all out of 5. X. And there's your final answer. 2 2/5 x. Now we're going to move on to dividing fractions. And fortunately, with dividing fractions, our goal is multiply them. So if you know how to multiply fractions, you should know how to divide fractions. So dividing fractions, our goal is we want to multiply. And all you really need to know is you multiply by the reciprocal. And the reciprocals are just the flipped version of a fraction. And take special note that they're not as mixed numbers. So for example, 3/4 equals 4/3 as a reciprocal. And I'm not going to say equals because these aren't equal, but 3/4 and 4/3 are reciprocals. Because all you do is flip the 4 and the 3, and that becomes 4 over 3, and we just write it as an improper fraction. One more important thing to know, especially for later on in algebra, is reciprocals have a product of 1. That becomes really useful when we solve equations. We can cancel stuff using that property. So they have a product of 1. So what I mean is if we took, for instance, let's say negative 5 over 2, and we multiplied it by its reciprocal, which is a negative 2 over 5. Notice it doesn't matter where I put that negative because it's still just a negative fraction. Check it out. My 2's will cancel and become 1's. My 5's will cancel and become 1's. So it's really just negative 1 times negative 1, which is positive 1. All right, another way to say that we multiply by the reciprocal when we divide is copy, change, flip. This means the same thing. We're multiplying by the reciprocal. That means we are copying the first fraction we are changing the division to multiplication, and then we are flipping the second fraction. That's just a memory tool to help you remember multiplying by the reciprocal. And the reason we change it is because, think about it, division and multiplication are inverse of each other. They're opposites operations. So you can subtract to check an addition problem, or you can multiply to check a division problem. All right, let's do an example with division. Let's say 3 1/3 divided by -2 1/2. All right, remember when we multiply fractions, we always convert them into improper fractions first. That was our first step. So I'm going to do the same thing here. So I'm going to convert these to improper. So times and add. I'm going to do 3 times 3 is 9 plus 1 is 10 over 3. Divided by, don't do that copy, change, flip first. You want to make sure that you're getting the improper fractions first. So 2 times 2 is 4, plus the 1 gives me 5 over 2, and don't forget that's a negative. And now I'm going to do multiply by the reciprocal, or copy, change, flip. Copy the first one down, 10/3. Change the division to a multiply, and then we're going to flip our second fraction. So that's a -2/5. And it doesn't matter, again, where that negative is, just as long as you know the fraction is negative. So look for common factors. 5 and 10 have a common factor. 5 will go into 5 once, it'll go into 10 twice. Now we just multiply across. 2 times -2 is -4 is one way to think of it. Another way is we have an odd number of negatives. There's only one, so our answer is negative. So it's -4/3. Or make that a mixed number. 3 will go into 4 one time. 1's left over out of 3, and it's a negative. So -1 1/3. All right, let's step it up a notch. Let's throw some variables in there. So -7 over 8x divided by -5 over 6x. First off, they're both proper fractions. They're not mixed numbers, so we don't have any additional steps on this one. So we can just copy it, change it, and then flip it. So copy it down and make it -7 over 8x. Change it to multiplication, and then flip it so it becomes 6x over 5, and it's negative. Mathemagic, poof, happening there. We just changed division to multiplication. And now we have some cool things happening because we have an x on the top and an x on the bottom. So they cancel. So now we can check and look for common factors on the top and bottom. So 8 and 6. 2 will go into 8 4 times. 2 will go into 6 3 times. Multiply across. We have an even number of negatives. So our answer is positive. So 7 times my 3 gives me 21. 4 times my 5 gives me 20. And 20 will go into 21 one whole time. 1 is left over out of 20. So it's 1 1/20. All right, let's apply what we've learned onto a word problem. If a cheetah can run 64 miles per hour, how far can a cheetah run in 1/8 of an hour? Well, basically, we're thinking here of 1/8 of 64. The reason we are is because 1/8 of an hour represents a part of the whole hour, which is 64 miles that it covers. So that's the quick way to do this one. So 1/8 of 64, we would just do 1/8 times 64 over 1. And then 8 and 8, 64 have a common factor of 8. 8 will go in 8 once, 8 will go into 64 8 times, and we get 8 over 1, or 8 miles. So anytime you can use the word of in a sentence, like the cheetah ran 1/8 of the 64, then you can do multiply. In a way you can see that a little more visually with the units is 1/8 of an hour. The hour is on top, and 64 miles per 1 hour. Notice our hours would cancel and we'd be left with miles. So it's really the same thing. So 1/8 times 64 would give us 8 miles. All right. Catch me if you can.